Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Ask IoT video series. I'm Ryan Chacon, and on today's episode, we are going to answer the question of what are IoT onboarding best practices? And I'll be talking with Brendan Michaelsen, the VP of Technology of Lithios. They're a product design and development collective focused on building beautiful web, mobile, and IoT platforms. A lot of value here. I think you're going to really enjoy it. If you're watching this on YouTube, we would truly appreciate a like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you get the latest episodes as soon as they are out. But other than that, let's get into the conversation. Welcome, Brendan. Thanks for taking time to chat with me today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, Ryan. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yep. So let's go ahead and kick this off with having you give a quick introduction about yourself and the company, kind of what you all do in the space, role you play in the industry, that kind of thing.
Sure. So my name is Brendan Michaelsen. I'm the VP of Technology for a company called Lithios in downtown Raleigh, North Carolina. My role sort of on a day-to-day is I manage our product technology design teams and really work sort of as the liaison between our clients, that's IoT clients,
Right.
that's enterprise clients, and, translating their wants, desires, passions for their products into tech, and then, scaling that up and deploying that, debugging, all that good stuff.
Fantastic. So you're right there in like the tech triangle down North Carolina.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's a
Oh,
lot of great talent. A lot of people with big ideas. It's a
yeah.
good place to be.
Yeah, it's been growing for a while. I mean, I remember 10 plus years ago when that was kind of getting more started up and people were talking
Yeah.
about how it was going to be more of a big tech hub, and it's continued to grow year after year. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
all right. So today our conversation, we wanted to focus around IoT onboarding, what that really means, how people can do it well, those kinds of things. And I think, based on the role you play in the company, I'm really excited to have you kind of talk and shed some light on these areas. So what I'm going to do is let me switch our view here and make you the center of attention. First question I wanted to just quickly, for the audience who may not know exactly what we mean when we say IoT onboarding, what does that mean? How would you explain to somebody who's kind of like, what is that? What is IoT onboarding? How does what part of the experience is that, and how should we be thinking about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about IoT onboarding, it's usually one of two things. When someone, a consumer, really any user is interacting with an IoT product, they're usually having to do sort of a one-time setup at the beginning. And that can be either, if it's a sort of self-contained device, that can be sort of on the device itself, booting it up, getting it connected, all that good stuff,
Right.
With sort of feedback on the device. What's more common, these days, and what we interact with a lot is having sort of a parent mobile app or web app that, pairs directly to an IoT device. So for example, if I buy a Philips Hue smart light bulb or something like that, I'm downloading an app that allows me to change colors and do all of that stuff. Before I get in to do sort of all the fancy customization, I go through sort of a multi-screen, like, great, here's your light bulb. First unpackage it, screw it into the light fixture you want it in, then check that your Wi-Fi is enabled and connect via, this process. And so what we think about it as is really the first window that users have to experiencing your product, and it gets it sort of set up correctly. So there's less need to sort of troubleshoot or debug down the road, because, you have a semblance, you have a good idea that the user set it up correctly, via following your interactive instructions.
Yeah. That's it's a great way to kind of think about it as that first contact point with the product, kind of sets the tone for them, of kind of the usability and the overall enjoyment of the experience they're going to have with the device from the beginning. So obviously there's so many different ways to approach the onboarding process, but at a high level, what are some of like the best practices that companies can be thinking about? Not to go into crazy detail, but just kind of like rattle off some of the things that that pretty easy for people to do well and should make sure they're thinking about during the onboarding process of, or when they're building the onboarding process, I should say.
Yeah, great question. And I actually pulled in a couple of answers for this from our director of user experience and wizard Serafina, who's done a lot of these. So I'll be sort of roping her answers in here as well.
Sure.
But So really the biggest thing is to keep it simple. So, onboarding is a process by which, a user is being introduced to your product. And so you really want to make sure that you take the tasks that are absolutely necessary for the onboarding and break those into discrete steps. So for example, connect to Wi-Fi. That's absolutely necessary for the product to function. That needs to be part of the onboarding. Like whether you need to give your device a name, all those things. And you sort of list those out in a set of discrete steps. And you really want to sort of think of those steps as like different screens or different tasks, because having them on one big long flow that's like
Right.
can be really overwhelming. So you don't want to do something like that. And then for each step in terms of design, you really want to reduce like on-screen clutter and really lean into blank space, and the blank space that can really kind of draw users' attention towards the important actions you want them to do. So not having cluttered UI.
Yeah, not overwhelming them with too much on the screen. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing that we've sort of seen that's been really successful in kind of users' kind of success, feedback and everything, has been having interactivity between what's going on in the app and what's going on in the device. So, check to see, if there's a blinking light, and then tap this button. And when you tap the button on the device, it turns green. You get sort of that real-time feedback that kind of draws parity between the two, and makes it feel like a more kind of wholly built experience, I'd say.
Right.
And then, as a whole, as product designers, we're really trying to get users into a product and using it as fast as possible. So besides the steps that are absolutely required, taking everything else that may not be 100% necessary and allowing users to skip those steps to get into the product experience, and then be able to go back and do those later. So if that's, choose a room for your light bulb to be in, or whether that's, set a description or set an icon, or things that provide customization and good user experience, but can be done a little bit later if a user really wants to just get in and sink their teeth into it.
Right.
And finally, from a design point of view, we really sort of want to lean into using imagery and icons and not just big walls of text. And that goes for, product design in general. But in this particular case, the focus, the user's focus is going to be on the product itself. And so you want to provide, easy to digest instructions that don't require, reading a terms of service level amount of content to get to, the important actions they actually need to take. So I'd wrap those into sort of a best practice cheat sheet, so to speak.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's super helpful. I think a lot of that is stuff that we as users take for, or don't think about how valuable it is. But there's a lot of thought that goes into building it the way that you're describing, and those best practices. Like there's intent, right? It's not just kind of doesn't happen by accident. But so if I let's say I have a device or a product out there, and I want to go about evaluating my current onboarding process to find areas of friction, issues, etc. How do people do that, or what's that approach going to look like?
Yeah, good question. So the biggest thing, we tell our partners that have live products is talk with your customers. And that, we as sort of a development shop and consortium sort of do a lot of that work, in our discovery process. But that looks like, focus groups or surveys, or, any amount of sort of measuring that. And in a lot of cases, customers will respond very positively to being asked for feedback to improve a product, especially sort of directly. Everybody hates sort of, anonymous emails that come through like, take a survey. But if you reach out sort of on a personal point to ask your customers to help you improve your product, we get a lot of good responses for that. In terms of, analytics, what we usually look for is to have our customers look at measures of drop off. So that's, how many users start your onboarding versus how many finish. What does that ratio look like? Can you employ things like Google Analytics or Hotjar or Full Story or these analytics packages to find specific steps or specific actions that don't get completed or users drop off? Because that would indicate a major friction point right there. And then, I would say if your onboarding process, gets done by your users, usually, directly after a sales flow or a sales driven flow, getting feedback from leads on their experience, sort of when it's fresh, directly after they do your onboarding, would be a good way to sort of, have sort of that fresh feedback.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because, like, I think when any of us use an app and go through that onboarding process, there are points of friction, and the ones that I've seen do it well are the ones who do ask for feedback early in that process, like right kind of when you potentially could experience it.
Mhm.
And then there obviously are ways to track user engagement right through different software to see where are people getting hung up, what's taking them long time, where are they kind of maybe exiting,
Right.
or what are the problems. So all of those things super super important. I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
So if a company doesn't have a user-friendly
Mm.
onboarding process, what does that really lead to? And I guess what I'm really trying to get at is, why is this so important? Like, what are some of the stories you've heard of people not putting enough emphasis on this, and then obviously having a negative experience with their end user?
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of those examples, but you know, the onboarding experience, I think, as I said, is that first window, is that first interaction that a user has with your product. And we've run into, clients that have come to us with really good products that
Mm,
are well built and work really effectively, that sort of have an idea that their product isn't effective, that they didn't engineer it correctly or everything, because they just can't get their engagement metrics up, or they cannot get users to kind of use it consistently. And in a number of those cases, we found that is directly linked to just misunderstanding, and misunderstanding that, in a the sort of busy world that we all live in, that just sort of ends up being malaise and desire not to use something if you don't
right,
really understand
right,
the full functionality, right?
right.
And so, when we dig into it as engineers, we go, this is a fantastic product. Why is no one using it? There's sort of a lack of understanding that could be explained with, additional steps or sort of a better setup flow. And
Well,
yeah,
I would like to, I also think that, there are different people that need to be involved in that process,
right.
right? Like, you have, you mentioned the engineers, like, why are people using this? This thing's great. It's like, but I think there's another, like, the designers and the specialists when it comes to thinking through the onboarding process strategically. That's oftentimes a different mindset, because I think sometimes engineers are too close to the product. And they're like, oh, this is a no brainer. It's very easy to get set up because I built it. But for a, potentially a very widespread user base of a product, you have to
Right.
really be thinking about what's going to cause the least amount of friction to the most amount of people, and thinking
Right.
about how that works.
Exactly. And, a lot of that can sort of be done with, going through sort of a formal UX flow, what we call user experience flow
Yeah,
process,
right,
and leading
right.
that into sort of a curated, user interface design, process where go through that and iterate and, show those with, little context as possible
Hmm.
to potential users or current users before you actually lay down the code to do that.
Right,
Means that you sort of pull it away from the engineering and sort of the making it happen, so to speak, and
right,
you
right, right.
really focus on that experience. It's a much more effective, not to mention, more economical way to sort of test your ideas and really make sure you've got that flow honed
Yeah,
in a way you want
for
it. Yeah.
for sure. And then how do you kind of recommend companies go about improving their onboarding process? 'Cause I'm sure people are going to be watching this and saying, "Yeah, let me rethink the way our onboard process is done." And I'm sure there's kind of an approach that, or a way to maybe kind of start that process, because I think a big part is trying to determine how much information is needed, what information is needed,
Mhm.
where are the friction steps, which you kind of already alluded to. But what are the first steps you would recommend a company do to kind of start to improve that process that maybe they already have developed?
Yeah, that's great. What I would say is, you know, in the service of getting an onboarding process to sort of the flow that it works best in, which is these discrete, bite-sized,
Hmm.
step-by-step pieces that provide feedback to users sort of as you go. You
Right.
want to take what you have existingly and ensure that you are delivering, the minimal number of crucial steps for an on-front onboarding process. So, the rule of thumb for us is what is 100% necessary for the product to function in a seamless fashion. And obviously, we can't write up sort of an exact science, an exact formula for everybody, because some products require, maybe to name the product is a required step for a certain device.
Yep.
But
Yep.
for one, it's just a customization. And so
Right.
that really is on the product owner and, working with a team like us, with some expertise in that area. But, things like steps required for connectivity, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, et cetera, things like that. And, limiting the amount of customization, all that stuff really to make it not cumbersome.
Sure.
But, once you sort of have a list, so to speak, of what actions are necessary for that, then, you can, even on just a sheet of paper, you can sort of say, okay, how would we break this into steps? And, a good way to sort of think about that is that a step consists of, one single action we want the user to take, and then usually a corresponding measure of like success.
Gotcha.
So, for example, it'd be, press the center button and then the light will blink twice and you've done it, so
Yep. Right.
you provide sort of that, do this and you will immediately see success. And that keeps users engaged in the process because they are continually seeing feedback for their actions in a positive way.
Right.
And, sort of continue to push that desire to like continue and, they're making progress through this.
Right.
We talk about, design elements. We talk about things like, progress bars, progress percentages, and sort of, little mini celebrations when certain milestones are achieved. And, usually that's sort of at the end of a short onboarding, or if it's a more complicated onboarding, you sort of give the user that feedback as you go, as they see direct feedback from their actions.
Fantastic. Yeah. Really appreciate again, like you taking the time to talk about this. This is something that I out of all the content I've created, we really have not focused on onboarding, but it is very critical to that first impression, to the overall experience somebody has with a product. And not even just from on the consumer side, but also on the enterprise side too. I mean, there are lots of products that are used by different types of end users that being able to get this stuff set up and sorted out is very important to be thinking through and something you really can't overlook.
Yeah.
As it relates to what you all do, if our audience out there wants to kind of learn more, follow up, and maybe touch base about some of these topics we talked about today, what's the best way do you think they could do that?
Absolutely. So our website is lithiosapps.com.
Okay.
We have a few things on there. We've got kind of a lot of, a showcase of our products and our portfolio. We've got something that our team has developed that's really useful for something like this, called a mobile app roadmap.
Okay.
Is sort of a meticulous collection of all the learnings that our team has put together over the last, almost half decade of working with customers and going through the multi-step process all the way from discovery of a new product to deployment. And really all we ask in return for, downloading that is, to give us your email address. So,
Right.
go check that out, download it. Our teams work really hard on it. And we heard a lot of really great things of users, sort of getting into that. And then, if anyone has a product that, they're curious to sort of see where it could go working with a team of professionals, look into booking one of our discovery sessions. Our DevOps team, sort of focuses on bringing clients in, and then we, kind of sit down with them for several hours and really, tear things down and build things up, whiteboard, sticky notes, all that good stuff to really build an effective idea of a product, whether that's a brand new product or something that's been in the works for a while, just to see how we can help. So yeah, that's a lot of great options.
Fantastic. Well, Brendan, thank you so much again for taking the time. Great topic, great conversation, fantastic points. Appreciate the team kind of jumping in and providing you with some of their insights as well as you're able to relay here. But yeah, I could envision us talking again about a lot of different topics as it relates to this part of the process and part of the development. So we'll have to chat kind of offline about other types of ways we can put some content together, because I think this is going to be really insightful for our audience.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Ryan. We really appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for watching that episode of the Ask IoT video series. I hope you found a lot of value in it. If you did, please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps others find it and make sure that you get the latest episodes as soon as they become available. Other than that, if you have any questions or topics that you would like us to cover in this series, please leave them in the comments or shoot us an email at hello@iotforall.com. Other than that, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.